Welcome to Tales from the Fandom, a podcast that brings a special guest out of the multiverse and straight to you. And now your host, David Ginsburg.
And welcome to another episode of Tales from the Fandom. I am proud to have as my guest today the creator and producer of the Nightlight Podcast, Tonia Thompson, joining me to discuss a lot of fun topics, fandom topics that really just are here and good for discussion in the month of October. Welcome to the podcast, Tonia.
Thank you. I'm super excited to be here.
I am so happy to have you as a guest. I remember before we got started, I was telling you that someone had retweeted, I believe it is the Nightlight Podcast, before you even had started it, just like to promote it. And I immediately was super interested because I really love trying to expand my horizons on pretty much everything. And Nightlight Podcast just was like something that I had to be ready to check out once you launched. And as of now, you've been rolling for a while now.
Yeah, we launched on June 26th, and we've had an episode every week since then.
That's awesome. And we will definitely be talking about Nightlight Podcast and everything else under the sun that you are doing. But first, we're going to dive into some fandom discussion. And one of the ones that stuck out is actually getting I guess it's not a reboot, but a reimagining or a new series. But you're a big Twilight Zone fan.
Huge fan of the Twilight Zone. I cannot believe that somebody's letting me talk about the Twilight Zone on a podcast. Like, this is amazing.
One of the things that I love to do is have people discuss, not only the big fandoms or the small fandoms, but, things that you're really passionate about. And I haven't had anyone talk about the Twilight Zone. And it's perfect, number one, for October, and two, because of what's, is going to be coming out again. I figured I certainly have some memories about the Twilight Zone, but not really fresh enough to be like, oh, well, let's talk about these particular episodes. But how did you get into the Twilight Zone? Like, what was it that drew you to it?
So, I don't know if you remember this or if you're old enough even to remember this, but there used to be this thing called Nick at Night. Nickelodeon had like these older TV shows like I Love Lucy and stuff like that on that they played at night. And I don't remember if it was Nick at Night, but there was another channel that was like that if it wasn't Nick at Night, and they had Twilight Zone. And so, I just happened to watch it one day, and I was like, oh, this show is just, it's really cool. Like, I was already into horror at that point and, super excited about anything that had anything, with supernaturalness to it or, elements of the unknown, that type of thing, speculative fiction. Although I didn't know that's what it was called then, obviously. And kind of got hooked on it that way. And then as I got older, I started buying DVDs and eventually started, streaming episodes of the Twilight Zone and watching them again and again and again and again.
I will definitely say, for the people that might be joining us for this episode their first time, I am definitely in the range of old. I think I caught Twilight Zone on like actual reruns at some point, but I do remember, I don't know if it was I can't remember what it was as far as the channel you were talking about it, and it definitely comes to mind of those reruns of those kind of shows, and it's like, because in fact there was a time period, and it might be that or it might be something else, where even recently it was like, okay, the kids have gone to bed, but here, keep watching our channel while we show like different recent shows that were in syndication at that point.
Yeah, which is awesome. I think it's really cool to that a lot of stations are showing some of their older material.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of those things where even now, like, and this is totally not Twilight Zone related, like, I'm getting my kids into a cartoon show from Disney called Kim Possible, but it's not available on DVD anywhere. It's only available on like Disney On Demand. And I think that's one of the things that is tough for a lot of those older shows is, and I think it's like caught up in music rights or some kind of thing where they can't release it on DVD or streaming. So they have it tied to their channels.
Yeah. I think that's probably a big thing that holds about, because a lot of companies, they didn't envision this back in the, 50s, 60s 70s that you could just be at home on your computer, watching a show, so copyright and digital rights that didn't really exist in the form that it needs to today. Back then, so all the rights are kind of up in the air and people are suing people and they're like, I don't know what we should do, so let's just not do anything.
Exactly. Or you get the music changes where it's like, I don't remember that song being played in that like that's not the song. Because
Right.
and one of the instances is like my wife started watching Dawson's Creek, and the opening theme song is not the theme song that they had at all.
Really? I haven't tried to stream that one, so I didn't know. I'm gonna have to check that out now. I need to see what song it is.
It is not. It's not the one where it's like, I don't want to wait.
Yeah, for our lives to be over.
Yep, that one. That is not the song anymore. I'm breaking people's hearts right now.
Oh, womp womp.
So before Twilight Zone, like how did you get into horror? Like, was that something even before Twilight Zone?
Yeah. So I am a middle child. I have an older brother who's 10 years older than me. My dad was really into horror movies, although, I think if you were to ask him, he would say, no, I wasn't, I'm not into horror movies. I wasn't into horror movies, but, he definitely watched some horror movies, like Tales from the Crypt. When that was on HBO, he watched that a lot. I wasn't allowed to watch that, but when my brothers were around, they'd be like, oh, I want to watch, Candyman or Halloween or whatever. And I could watch it. Like, they let me watch anything. I just had to like turn my head when there was nudity or something. Like, my parents didn't care about like, people getting decapitated. Just, as long as you don't see any titties, it's okay. So I was allowed to watch those things. And, I found it really fascinating because it didn't necessarily really scare me. They told me, oh, it's going to give you nightmares and, all of this. But I was a really anxious child. And it actually made me less anxious to watch horror movies. So, I think at the time, it was one, I was getting to do a really cool thing that my friends didn't get to do. But then also there was this aspect of feeling like I could have some control over the things that scared me. And so I kind of got hooked on it. And then in second grade, my teacher tasked us with creating our own little picture books. And me being me, I wrote basically like I ripped off Halloween. Let's just call it like it is. I had this serial killer. His name was Michael. He used a knife. And so like complete with bloody illustrations and all, I turned this book into my teacher. And of course she's horrified. And me being a second grader, I'm like, she's scared. I scared her. This is the coolest thing ever. Not realizing that she was afraid that like I was being neglected or something. But at that moment, like seeing that I could elicit a reaction out of people with horror and that horror could change the way that I felt about things, even though I didn't have the language for it, I was like, this feels amazing. And so, I really sought out anything that had any elements of horror or science fiction or fantasy.
That's awesome. That's one of those things where you get the phone or the parents get the phone call. It's like, we need to discuss what Tanya's drawing and writing about in class.
Yeah. My mom did. I asked her a couple of years ago, I was like, do you remember? Because I remember her going to see my teacher. I don't know if I'm assuming my teacher called her, but I remember like being at the school and like looking at my book and, my mom's in the classroom with the teacher, but I don't know what they were talking about. I wasn't paying attention and she doesn't remember either. So unfortunately that's lost in the ether somewhere, what exactly occurred during that meeting. But
oh my goodness.
Yeah. Miss Lassiter, if you're out there somewhere and you remember me, let us know how that conversation went.
So then you discovered Twilight Zone on one of the late night channels that was airing it. What was it about Twilight Zone? Like what was the hook for you on that?
Honestly, like this sounds kind of cheesy, but I've always felt kind of like an old soul. My mom listened to oldies, and so like I didn't even listen to like quote unquote contemporary music until I was probably like 9 or 10. My dad listened to Motown, so like I didn't listen to anything that was made after I was born until a good while after I was born. So, a lot of things just from the past, I felt kind of attracted to it, I guess, partially probably because of the music, but also because my dad, my mom both watched, some of the older shows like, I Love Lucy was one that my mom loved. My dad watched Gunsmoke a lot. I know, so stereotypical, right? But
Okay, so for people that might not know, just Google Gunsmoke and you'll understand.
yes. Yes, it's like the old dudes. I mean, he was in the recliner and everything. Like, yeah. So, I think I grew up around a lot of, things from the past. The house that I grew up in was pretty old. It was built pre-World War II. My parents didn't have a lot of money, so we had a lot of hand-me-downs, so we had old typewriters made in the 30s and the 40s. And, there just wasn't a lot of new stuff around the house. So I guess I sort of became enamored with the past.
That is definitely understandable, and especially when you get to something like the Twilight Zone where it's black and white and it's got like that. It's really, for people that haven't seen the Twilight Zone, it's definitely something that needs to be seen. Like, you and I could talk about it forever, but we could never convey what that show did at the time. Like, and there's things that were in the Twilight Zone that have been carried over to science fiction fantasy ever since.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Those stories came out.
Yeah, and that's something that I really liked about the Twilight Zone, and I think that's part of the reason why I love it so much. Is it's one of those things where it's interesting when you watch it, as a child or when you're younger, you're like, okay, this is entertaining. But then, the more I watch it as I get older and think and learn more about the politics during that time, and I see the reflection of the politics of what was going on during that time in the Twilight Zone. There was a space race. So there's, there's tons of episodes about alien encounters and, spacecraft and, men going out into space and, things of that nature. And, just looking back on the things that people were afraid of at that time and understanding how they kind of made their way into the Twilight Zone and what the Twilight Zone would look like today if we were to kind of morph it into the things that we're afraid of today, what might that show look like? Like, I actually had a career goal that I didn't tell anybody, but I wanted to reboot the Twilight Zone. So when I heard Jordan Peele was doing it, I was like, I literally cried because I was like, no, I can't do this now. Because it was one of those pie in the sky dreams. Like, it wasn't something I was like really trying to do. It was just like, I want to do this one day, and one day I'm going to work toward it and I'll get there. But I just felt like it was so far out that I wasn't going to actively plan for it or anything. And I didn't realize like how much I wanted to do it until someone else was going to do it. And then I knew I wouldn't be able to. And I was super sad about it. But then I tweeted Jordan Peele and I was like, hey, can I write for the Twilight Zone? So that, that didn't go anywhere, but that's okay. I tried.
That's right. And it's one of those things where, the one thing that I always think about is, dang, I wonder how much like book rights are. Like, how much would it cost for me to buy the book rights to turn a book that I love into a TV show or a movie? Not that I even have like that general skill of like knowing what to do if I even got the rights. Like, okay, what do I do from here? But
movie happened.
Magic.
Yes.
But I know that one of the, and I'm going to try not to spoil any of the Twilight Zone memories that I have, but like the one episode that always sticks into my mind is like that surgery episode where with the woman.
Everyone looks different than she does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
That's the one that's stuck in my head all this time. And it feels like for the ones that I saw is like the most iconic one of like it just evoking that, like, not only is it science fiction, but at the same time it's got like that horror element to it.
Yeah. I think that one's called Beauty's in the Eye of the Beholder or something like that. I know I told you earlier that I was like bad at remembering titles, but I vaguely remember that one. So for folks who want to look it up, it's something like that.
Now, do you have any particular favorites of the Twilight Zone that you like?
Oh yeah. Pretty much all of the ones that Richard Matheson wrote or were were adaptations. There we go. of his stories. Pretty much all of those I loved. Nightmare at, I can't even remember if it's 20 or 30,000 feet. I don't know why, but that's kind of a classic one. That's something that everyone thinks about, I think, when you say Twilight Zone. They've heard about that one. It's sort of become part of our culture in many ways now. As far as like lesser known ones, there's one where it's called The Invaders. That's the name of that episode. And these aliens land on this woman's house, and like they're tiny little aliens, and like she's fighting them, but they're like, they've got knives or whatever, and they're like cutting her ankles. And the ending is just, I don't want to give it away. Watch it. You're just kind of like, whoa. I would say that one was really well done. I don't often get surprised by endings, but I totally did not see that one coming. And it could be because like at the time I saw it, I was like 15 or 16, but I remember watching it and thinking, well, I did not see that coming. Let's see. There's one more I'm trying to remember that I know that I really like, and it floated away. I can't remember it.
That's okay. Remember, we're old.
Yes.
We don't have to remember things. It's just whatever happens to come by in that stream of consciousness.
Yes. But it's like, it's the episode like right before The Invaders or right after The Invaders. I can't remember it right now.
One of the things that when you were talking got my attention when you were mentioning, Twilight Zone for the modern day. And I know that when you sent in the pre-show thing that I send out, you had mentioned Black Mirror.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that connection of like Twilight Zone but modern day, like with the modern issues, especially with Black Mirror's like heavy focus on technology. Like that show, and I got into it late, and there's a few of them that make me definitely like squeamish, but it's definitely one of those shows where it's like, wow, like it totally is like modern day Twilight Zone.
It is in very many ways. And one of the things that I like to tell people is that Black Mirror isn't necessarily Twilight Zone. Just because, one, it mainly deals specifically with like technology gone wrong, and not some of these other political aspects of things that are going wrong just in the world. And it seems to also, exaggerate some of the things. Like, there's that one episode where the girl is like, she's getting a certain number of likes or whatever. And if her score falls below a certain point, then she doesn't have access to things and things of that nature. And, like China was talking about doing something like that at one point, just seeing like how some of these things that have been in Black Mirror have either happened or people have talked about it in real life. And it's like, do you people not watch the show? Did you not see how that goes? What are you doing? Stop. No.
Yeah, I saw a robot dog recently that looked exactly like the Black Mirror dog. I was like, no.
Like, do not, please, like somebody please send them a DVD or email, whatever you got to do. They need to watch this. I need them to stop because this is not going to end well for this. We know how this ends. But I think that, because Black Mirror, I think is more contained than Twilight Zone. Twilight Zone, it had things about alien encounters and monsters. And there's this one episode where the government basically decides certain occupations are obsolete. And it's about this librarian whose job has been determined to be obsolete. A lot of people like to say like librarianship is obsolete or becoming obsolete these days, which isn't true, by the way. But, it just kind of makes you think about that kind of stuff. I think Twilight Zone runs a wider gamut. And, it could be because there are way more Twilight Zone episodes than there are Black Mirror episodes. Like, even if you just look at number of minutes of content, huge difference. But Black Mirror seems very specialized. But if you were to look at Black Mirror and then look at American Horror Story, especially this previous season, not the one that's on now, but last season, the AHS Cult, the two of those together, I think, can really summarize what Twilight Zone is. There's the technical aspect of what we're afraid of right now, and then in American Horror Story Cult, we're looking more at like the division in this country and the things that are scaring people at this moment because of the last presidential election.
Mm-hmm. And look at that. Almost a neat, perfect segue.
And believe it or not, I did it on purpose.
Oh, that's so helpful, because that way I don't have my terrible segues. So this worked much better, and I'm ruining it. But
That's
the
okay.
the on the flip side, as far as fandoms go, like you were very adamant in the email, American Horror Story.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to say, I watched the first one,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the only one I ever watched. I never got back into it. I never checked them out. I've heard good things about certain like, I don't know if you call them series,
Yeah.
or because they're not technically like seasons, because they're
Right.
I guess they're doing it however they're doing it. But again, I have to know, like, did you get in with Murder House, the original one? Did you
I
fall
did.
into it somewhere else?
No, I did. I watched it from the very beginning. The first season, like, I didn't super love it, but I think I was just so starved for something good on TV that was actual horror that, it was kind of like, okay, I'm just going to watch it. And I kept watching it just because I couldn't find anything else on TV like it. And then, I think the next season was Asylum. I'm pretty sure it was. And that one was, I think that one was better than the first season. But then when American Horror Story Coven came along, I was like, okay, this is my jam. Like, we're talking about witches and magic, and like that was my thing. And so I've kind of watched it religiously ever since. The first couple of seasons, like I ended up catching up on the first season by like streaming the first 6 episodes
Mm-hmm.
or something, and then watching the final 6 just kind of like as I got to them, or 12, whatever it is. And then the second season, I kind of just watched as I had time. It wasn't wasn't one of those things where it's like American Horror Story comes on tonight, we need to sit down and watch it live, or let's record it and watch it, tomorrow morning, or whatever the case may be. It was, I have some time, I'll turn it on while I'm working or something. And then the third season was, I made plans to be in front of the TV and watch it. So, and then when Cult came along, I was really, really, really torn, because it was kind of like, I want that escape. You watch TV, shows, movies, whatever, you read books, listen to podcasts to think about things outside of your reality. And when Cult came along, it was sort of digging into this wound that I already had in reality. And so it was super uncomfortable to watch it, but yet I couldn't look away. At that point, I think that is when I became a fan, more than just, I'm watching it, this is fun. Like, I enjoy it. Like, I started looking up stuff about American Horror Story and like reading the stories behind the stories, like how each season they take something that's actually happened. Like, there's an actual murder house in LA, for instance. And so that's what the first season is based on. So they take something from reality and then they create this series around it. And it wasn't until last year that I actually started to get into the behind the scenes aspect of American Horror Story and really think about the choices they were making as writers and as directors, and as creatives on what they wanted to bring out into the world.
What's your favorite thing about American Horror Story? I know, obviously it is a show that there's nothing like it on terrestrial TV at this point.
Right.
That it's really something that's just outstanding. It's in its own category, essentially.
Yeah.
But what is it that, is that thing that you just, it just takes you?
I think, for me, I'm kind of partial to TV and books that are a series, but they're limited, right? Like, we know that it's not going to go on for forever. There's going to be, X number of episodes of the season. So the story will wrap up in these seasons and there'll be a whole new thing next season. And we have no idea what to expect. Next season, the actors, a lot of them are the same, but the characters they're playing are completely different. And I think that's one thing that I really enjoy about it. Because you don't get bored. Like you might if you were watching just, any other show like, Grey's Anatomy, for instance. I still watch that, but I'm not like super duper interested in it because it's like I've been watching these characters for God knows how long, and it's like they're still on their same stuff. So, like I know there will be drama and it will be good drama, but I definitely watch it as more of a I'm just trying to relax and chill out. Whereas I watch American Horror Story more as an active participant in the viewing experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely one of those shows, and I know that I've with the new one that's come out, Apocalypse, that's airing now.
Yeah.
They've been talking about connections, and it's always been that thing with American Horror Story is the connections to the previous series or the other characters. How do they connect? And even I've clicked on articles where I'm reading along, just getting interested in it to the point of, well, do I want to invest the time to like watch it to see how everything unfolds?
Yeah.
Or am I good enough with just reading it and, getting my interest on that? And that's one of those things where that's how like a show is connecting, is if you start digging into, like you said, like the choices that are being made and all the stuff that's going on creatively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think, I think this season is probably the first season that I watch an episode and then like 2 days later, I'm like, when is the next episode of American Horror Story? Like it just feels like so much time has passed and I'm waiting too long between episodes. Like I haven't had time to watch the one that aired last night yet, which is going to be resolved after we finish recording this. But it's just like I find that I miss it when it's not on, and I look forward to it and I think about it, and like there are questions right now that I'm just like, what the heck is going on here? Like what? I have no idea where it's going. And normally like I'm pretty good at, watching a movie or a TV show and like I can see writers setting up stuff for later, and I'm like, oh, they're going to, this is what's going to happen. I'm really good at that, which means that like when I watch things, it can sometimes be boring for me. I've learned not to say it out loud so I don't ruin things for other people. But, once you're a writer, you start to see writers setting up stories for later. And I don't see that happening yet in this particular season. And I think that's part of the reason that it appeals to me so much. And a lot of that was last season too. Is it's just like I did not see where a lot of it was going, but this season I am completely lost. Like I have no ideas of how this season might end up. I don't know what's going on. I'm along for the ride.
That's always a good thing.
Yeah.
I know I've had a few different different series where friends of mine have watched them, and so I'll do the binge. I'll start binging them, and I'll send them messages after each episode. And there was a certain series because I'm just watching for fun. I'm paying I feel like I'm paying attention, and then certain like things happen. I start sending emails. How come you didn't tell me about this? I can't believe it. And then after that series, like that first season ended, I went back and watched it again because I had so many questions. I had hit Google. I'm like,
yeah.
I need my answers. I need my answers. Now with American Horror Story, is it something where you would recommend like, hey, you should binge on these episodes, like binge a series, and or is it something where you prefer to have them drawn out with an episode a week?
I'm on Twitter a lot, and I think Twitter has changed the way that I watch TV now. American Horror Story is one that I don't want to be spoiled because, I can't guess what's happening. There are some shows where I know, what's being set up. I may not know exactly how it's going to turn out, but I have a decent idea. So if it gets spoiled for me, it's not a big deal. But if you are averse to spoilers, you should definitely not wait and binge it because you're probably going to run up on something and you're going to see something that you wish that you didn't know, and you're going to watch it and be like, man, if I didn't know this was going to happen, then this would have been a lot more fun to watch or whatever. But And if you like having conversations with people about it, I think watching it live is the way to go as well, or at
Mhm.
least, a day or two delayed at most.
Right, because then after that, it's pretty much all over, and you're just
Yeah.
waiting for the next one and speculating about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite American Horror Story as far as like favorite series of it?
Yeah, definitely Coven is my favorite. I wouldn't say necessarily because it was so particularly well done, although I think it was well done. It's just like that's my kind of horror. I grew up in a house. I started writing this novel and I wanted to have some aspects of voodoo in it. But as I started to research, I realized that my grandmother practiced hoodoo, which is like this sort of like Southern Black magic religion thing that's mixed with Christianity. And, a lot of things that I grew up thinking were superstitions were really like things that stemmed from this belief system. And so, I was always interested in magic and witchcraft and, things like that, that just kind of, I enjoy stories like that. And ghost stories are, really my thing. But after I did that research, like I've been more drawn to stories that involve witchcraft or voodoo or hoodoo, anything along those lines. Because I think there's a lot of quote unquote witchy stories out there. There are fewer voodoo ones that are accurate. There's a lot of stuff out there where people are, like here's a voodoo doll, let's stick pins in it, and this is how it works, and that's sure, but there's so much more than that. So there's just not a lot of magic stuff kind of outside that whole realm of witchcraft. And I think a lot of it is misrepresenting a lot of different cultures. So when you see something that is a little more authentic, it hits a button and it's really nice.
That's awesome. And yeah, I definitely know as far as like the hoodoo and stuff, it's like because we live in Florida and
Mhm.
we get that general like southern feel of knowing, and then I think it's making as far as like the differentiation, is that a word? I don't know.
Yes.
uh I think that is becoming more prominent in like even just standard media as far as
Mhm.
like voodoo and hoodoo and a lot of the other like, and I wouldn't call it like witchcraft so per se, but just that kind of like spirituality
Yeah.
is definitely, it's coming to the forefront more as people are getting into, like, I guess discover, like some people are discovering
Mhm.
like their past, or like it's more acceptable to be talked about
Right.
now.
And I think a lot of people are getting the opportunity to tell their stories. There's this aspect, especially with hoodoo, I think, where in general, if I know for a fact, like if white people came around asking about hoodoo, people wouldn't answer them. They didn't want them to know about it. And so, having that sort of excluded from Hollywood, from publishing where you didn't have a lot of voices from these different cultures out there, you're not going to get a firsthand account of it like you would. You're going to get something that's watered down. You might even get some straight up lies because people just want to mess with you, and say, yeah, sure. So I think just people having the opportunity to tell their stories is one of the big things there. But I think also there is this sort of resurgence in looking back at where we came from and, trying to learn from our history and learn from our past and, pull things from our past down into our present.
Absolutely. I guess I have one final question on American Horror Story, and that is, do you have like a particular favorite character or actor or actress that you like find yourself drawn to in that series?
Honestly, it's different every season. I don't know. It's hard because as actors, I think all of the recurring actors are so strong, and every year, they are so different. Like this year, oh God, what's her name? I'm terrible. I've forgotten her name, but the one that plays Venable this season, don't know why I can't remember her name right now, but every season, like she nails the characters every season. And when she first appeared in this season, I didn't even realize it was her. So I think she would probably be my favorite actress from the whole thing. My favorite character, I would say Angela Bassett's character in American Horror Story Coven, but that's because it's Angela Bassett and I love her and she was a voodoo priestess and I mean, how could I not?
That's awesome. It's one of those shows where I definitely want to, at some point, revisit it. And at the same time, I've heard, I don't know if I can handle it. I watched Black Mirror. I handled most of those episodes, but I know that Ryan Murphy's got some squickiness about what he shows on the screen.
Yeah, I'm not bothered by too much. Like the Saw movies, I'm like, I don't really want to watch them. Like I can watch them and I cringe a little bit, and I'm good. But yeah, I haven't seen anything in any season that I've been particularly like, I can't watch this, except last episode, not last night, but the last week's episode of American Horror Story opened with like this big thing about snakes, and I have this huge phobia with snakes, so I couldn't watch that. But that's just because like I'm terrified of snakes, like literally panic attacks. It's bad. So there's snakes slithering all over the screen, so I couldn't watch the whole first scene.
Oh my gosh. No, thank you.
Yeah.
That's like a fast forward.
Yeah, I actually yelled at people on Twitter. I was like, why didn't you tell me about this? Someone should have warned me. You guys know. But after that, and snake stuff was over. Like I was good. Snakes are about the only thing that I can't watch.
Going from that to kind of more a character focused discussion, you wrote to me about a number of different things, and one of them was Vampire Diaries, but you specifically said for favorite characters, Bonnie Bennett from the Vampire Diaries, she seriously needs her own show, and that you would write the shit out of that.
Yes. Yes, I would.
And let me just say, I'm familiar on the periphery of the character of Bonnie Bennett, just very basic. I know that she's a witch, and at least general understanding. Beyond that, I know nothing. Okay,
so she is actually descended from a long line of witches, including like some witches that were here, settled in the first settlements here in America before it was America, or like right as it was becoming America. So it's like this lineage and heredity that heredity. That doesn't sound right.
Hereditary? No. Heritage?
Heritage. That's the word I'm looking for. Thank you.
We'll go through the H words.
Yes, there we go. We'll open up a dictionary and we'll figure it out. But that's her heritage. As she's sort of revealed throughout the storyline, she's not very present in the beginning, or at least not in any way that makes her three-dimensional. She's very much just a friend of Elena's and Caroline, and she's there and she kind of helps them get out of trouble sometimes. Sometimes she gets into trouble and they have to save her. But I can't remember what season it started, but as she kind of discovers that she is a witch and that she's got these powers, she starts to develop more as a character. And, there's not anything, I wouldn't say that there's anything particularly extraordinary about it, because, we've heard stories about a lineage of witches, that have been tasked with protecting, whatever from whenever. So it's not particularly inventive, but the fact that she is a Black character that is a witch, I think, is what really struck me, because, typically if you have a witch in something, she looks very, stereotypically goth, very pale skin and, dark hair and blue eyes, or, brown eyes. Definitely like a white girl, right? Mm-hmm. And to see somebody with my skin color that was a witch was just really cool for me. It was the first time that I'd really seen it. I'd seen voodoo priestesses and, things of that nature, that were Black women, but Bonnie Bennett was the first Black woman that I saw that was just a witch.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that really appealed to me. And then, as time went on in the series, I feel like they did a lot of injustice to her character. They could have gone so many good places with her character, but she she was very much, yes, she's a secondary character. Like, I get it. She's not going to have like these huge character arcs for herself. But I think that even when they tried to make her the center of something, it was still like she was just a piece of the puzzle. And they had to save her life, but like she couldn't do anything about it necessarily. Like, her job was just to basically not die or whatever. Like, it wasn't about her as a witch and, being good at being a witch and, embracing that and, really digging into that. She was so much just at the service of everyone else in that universe. And with the powers that she had and that whole lineage thing. And, I feel like they could have done so much cool stuff with it. They did the originals offshoot of the Vampire Diaries, which is also pretty good. I stopped watching it after like the second season, I think, just because I didn't have enough time. But like, I really think that if they were to decide to make a spinoff show from her perspective, which I don't even know that they can at this point. I'm trying to remember how it ended. The Vampire Diaries ended. I think they ended it with like her being old or something. So like they finished out her story. So they've even like closed the book on that. So you can't necessarily, just say, oh, well, never mind. Forget that last scene. We're going to, So, I mean, I feel like the doors have been closed on that, but there was so much that was left to be explored there that I thought would be really, really interesting and make for some good storytelling.
Just out of curiosity, because you said that you'd write the S out of it. What would you have wanted to do, like if you had been given that character and said, okay, spin-off show, what would you have done?
Well, I'm really partial to historical fiction. Again, the whole Twilight Zone thing, growing up with a bunch of old stuff around me. I would have spent a lot of time exploring her past and how it affects her in the present and how her family came to get these powers and, what it is that they are responsible for with these powers, rather than it being like, oh, well, we need somebody who's responsible for being the door between this world and the next. Like that was one season where she was, basically that, like all the dead people had to pass through her. It's like she doesn't really have a story if she's just the door, right? But the question is, why is she that door in that moment? And of course, in the Vampire Diaries, it was like they needed somebody to be the door. She was magic, so let's make Bonnie the door. But I think that it would have been really cool to, that there were some flashbacks that showed her great whatever grandmother at one point in one of the seasons, and I wanted more of that, to kind of see where that went, and just having her explore the past. I think a really cool show idea would be to have kind of like a police procedural kind of show, but not necessarily police in her instance, but have something happening in her world or in the world. Let's say she's like a hunter, kind of like Sam and Dean in Supernatural, or something along those lines, where she solves these supernatural mysteries, but in order to solve them, she has to look back at her past and connect with her ancestors. Because I think one thing about her being Black in particular is that you can invoke all of this ancestral magic, which doesn't really exist in traditional witchcraft, but I think is incredibly interesting.
That would have been a really good show, because not only that, like you play in this, you would get to have this show that interacts with a part of American history that people don't really, it's still one of those things where people do not
Yeah.
bring it up. It's not talked about. It's not
Very
covered.
invisible.
And even the stuff that's coming out now, it's still not as like you would feel that it would be more, like there would be more. And I think it's still it's like the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
And there's just so much more to be explored about it.
Yeah. So much more. So maybe somebody listening to this has lots of money and you want to pay me to write this. Get in contact. I want to do it.
There you go. Now, again, as we talked about at the beginning, you are a woman of many hats as far as like all sorts of projects going on.
Yes.
And I found you through a writer friend. I believe we're probably mutuals on Facebook, or not Facebook, but on Twitter.
Mhm.
And she had retweeted, that you were starting your podcast, and I was super interested. And your podcast has been going since June.
Mhm.
Tell people about the podcast, please.
All right. So Nightlight is a podcast of horror stories. And we kind of make them into audio dramas so that, they're narrated just like, you were reading a story, but there's some voice acting in it and there's sound effects and things in there to scare you. They're stories exclusively written by Black authors, primarily because I think that, one, horror is a space that has very much been white and male. Like you ask somebody, recommend me a horror book, and it's either Steve King or Dean Koontz. And it's like, can we name anybody else? Like everyone's heard of those guys. Let's do something else. And when Get Out came out, and everyone was like, this is so cool. And because one of the things like growing up, I'd watch a lot of these horror movies. And like you see these girls, like they run upstairs from the killer, and it's like, you don't do that. Like you wouldn't do that. Black people wouldn't do that. And I actually attended this panel shortly after I started the podcast, and it was entitled "Black Women Don't Trip," which works on so many levels, which I love. But I mean, it's true. Like, I watched all these movies, and like, there'd be a ghost in there, and like my dad and I are sitting here watching the movie, or my brothers, and we're like, we would have moved out of there. Like, why? No, it's time to go. The house is the ghost. They can have it. Bye. And so, just having it from that perspective of people who are not curious about like, what could be causing this? Let me research it. Kind of thing. Those horror stories are very different. And it's not necessarily that, the stories are quote unquote like super Black or anything. Like if you listen to most of them, you wouldn't necessarily know that a Black person wrote it. It's just a different perspective on stories and how the characters behave in horror stories. And I wanted to create a space for specifically Black horror writers to write the things that they wanted to write that they had a hard time getting placed somewhere else, because I struggle with that too. I send stories out and get rejections all the time. And, some of the stories may not be good, but some of them, I'm like, I know this is a good story. I've gotten it workshopped, feedback, whatever. And, it's just not getting picked up anywhere. And, you don't know how much of that is just because people necessarily can't identify with it on the page. And I think that that's a big barrier for a lot of people. It's one thing to read a story and be able to connect with characters, but when you're watching it or when you're listening, it's much easier to identify with those characters. So it's kind of, the idea is to help people connect more to stories written by Black authors, not because those stories are so different, but because they're so very much the same in so many ways. And I think a lot of people don't think that would be the case and don't necessarily realize that until it's kind of like right in front of them, and they can use their senses to experience it.
Absolutely. So you've been going since June 26th. You've got a number of different episodes out. I just went through your website and scrolled through. You release on a weekly basis?
Yes, every Tuesday.
Now, how long do your episodes run, as far as, are they generally like 20, 30 minutes, an hour, or is it just depending on the story?
It definitely depends on the story. Most episodes, the story part, so it's in two parts. There's the story is at the front, And that usually lasts 20 to sometimes up to 30 minutes, just depending on the length of the story. And then some authors, I give every author an opportunity to do an interview afterwards, because one of the things that I want to do is, boost a lot of these voices, a lot of these people who haven't had publications before, so they're thrilled to talk about their story and what they've done and, what they want to do with their writing career, and giving them an opportunity to share that with the world and expose people to new stories for them to read is really important to me. So at the end of every episode, we'll do an interview with the author if they choose to do it. I don't make anybody do it if they don't want to or don't feel like they have time. And, I'll ask them questions about their writing process and how they came up with the story idea. And, we'll just kind of chat, kind of like we're chatting. And that usually lasts anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes. So, looking at the stats, a lot of folks, I would say probably 60% of people listen to the story and the interview, and the other 40% will kind of stop right after the story ends.
What's the general reception been as far as, I know that there's a big buildup before the podcast even launched, as far as like getting people interested and hey, like this is what we're doing, get involved. What's been the reaction since the podcast has launched to now, as far as like what people are talking about or thinking about it?
Yeah, people have been really excited about it. I've gotten some really amazing notes from people, saying like, I finally feel like I'm being seen. I finally feel like I found my people. There was one note that someone sent me and like it made me cry, and I'm not a crier by any means. And like just reading it out, I realized how much it means to a lot of people. For me, it's about boosting voices and, telling scary stories, because that part's really fun too. But for a lot of people, it's changed their perspective. It's given them confidence to submit more of their work. I give personal feedback on every submission that I get sent. So, a lot of people send stuff in and I'll say, here's what worked, here's what didn't work. If I reject the story, and, I hear great things from those people too. They're like, oh, I didn't realize I was doing that. Okay. That's good to know. I understand. And, they'll send me something later and, it's better. And so, they're improving their work, and, I'm connecting people with other writers and or other lovers of Black horror. And, people are, really feeling like they found a family, which I think is probably the most unexpected but coolest thing about starting the podcast.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
That's really neat. I did have a question that popped in as you were talking about, the scary aspect. Do you feel that horror has drifted from what it used to be to something else? Like, is horror really horror anymore, or is it horror has like progressed into just something else as far as the storytelling goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's more expanded than progressed to something different. I think different things are shocking now than used to be shocking. So, if we were looking at, for instance, The Exorcist, when that came out, people were just horrified by it. And, like we watch it today and it's kind of like, okay, like that sucks, but like it's not particularly horrifying or scary for most people. And I think a lot of that is because, one, the number of people who are really invested in religion is decreasing in America. But if you were to watch like Latin American horror, there's still a lot of these horrific elements, possession and things like that in there. So it really teaches you a lot about different cultures, watching horror from different cultures and what they're afraid of, like on a cultural level. I think that horror morphs as our reality morphs. Things that weren't scary become scary. Things that were scary are no longer scary, just as things progress. Like for instance, if there would have been a metal dog in the Twilight Zone at some point, people would have been like, oh, that's really cool, it's like a robot. They might not have been as afraid of it as we are, because it's much closer to our reality, and we can see how that can go wrong. Like we've seen tech go wrong. We've seen these self-driving cars crash into things. We've seen things robots and computers doing things that they weren't programmed to do, or we had our computers crash, we click on something and something we didn't intend to happen happened. So we know that tech can absolutely do something we didn't tell it to do, and then adding an element of artificial intelligence on top of that really makes it more frightening. Whereas I think that during the time of the Twilight Zone, there wasn't really a framework for that, and I don't think that they would have found something like that all that horrifying. I think it would have been more interesting to them. Kind of like, we look at the episodes now, and a lot of their alien encounter episodes are more interesting to us than horrifying. But back then, when it was, we haven't even been off the Earth, we hadn't gone to the moon yet, the idea that there were Martians was like, that was the scariest thing, and now, like, the fact that there are other solar systems with, theoretically inhabitable planets on them, that wasn't part of the Twilight Zone. Like, our world has expanded so much that different things have become horrifying or frightening or full of tension, or you're just kind of scared about what's going on.
Absolutely. Now, we're recording this in right before the month of October. Do you have any plans specifically, because October's the spooky month with Halloween and everything?
Yes. My favorite month of the whole year. I actually I ordered some stuff off of Amazon. Like, I got some spiderweb pants and a jack-o'-lantern shirt, and I was going to wait until October 1st to wear them, and I was like, you know what? I don't care. It's almost October. I'm going to wear it anyway. So I've already kicked off October. But October is also Black Speculative Fiction Month, for those of you who don't know that. So one of the things that I'm going to do on the podcast is I'm going to have some bonus episodes this coming up month, and it's going to be, interviews with various authors who write in the space, and we're going to be talking about Black horror, and I'll have some bonus stories as well, more like flash fiction kind of stories. And I am working on a big surprise for Halloween that, if I can pull it off, it's going to be really, really cool. And it's going to be Twilight Zone related. So cross your fingers on that. Knock on wood, say a little prayer, light a candle, whatever you got to do. And hopefully that'll happen. But if that doesn't happen, then I'll have another cool episode on Halloween. It just won't be as cool as the things in my head right now.
Right, exactly. It's always like, okay, how do I make it work?
Yes.
Let's try to make it work. Come on, moving pieces,
Yes.
fall into place.
Yes, and it's going to be so freaking amazing if it comes together. Like, I'm so excited about it. If it doesn't come together, I'm still going to do it. It just won't be something that happens for October. But I want it to happen for Halloween.
Beyond the Nightlight Podcast, is there anything else that you do, that you work on? Any other projects that you're a part of?
Yeah, so I am working on writing an audio drama that is going to be another podcast with a friend of mine. Hopefully, we'll get somebody to pick it up, because audio dramas are a little bit more expensive to produce than, just narrated stories, because you have a number of actors and things like that you have to pay in studio time and that sort of thing. So we're working on that. We've written about half of the first season, and there's going to be some really cool stuff in that we're writing. And I am also working on a series of short stories that I'm going to publish in a book, because people have been asking me to put my short stories in a book. I tell a lot of stories on Twitter, and I've had people kind of asking me to adapt that and put it in a book, and some of the other short stories that I've written put in a book. So I'm hoping to release that, and I'm just going to give that to all of my patrons on Nightlight.
Awesome. Very cool. And for people that have made it all the way to the end here,
good for you people.
Good. Yes, that's always the sign of, like, my good listeners, is that they make it to the end. Where can people find Nightlight or find you on the internet?
All right, I am pretty much everywhere as Missdefying, MISSDEFYING. Nightlight is Nightlight Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And we're on Patreon at patreon.com/nightlightpod. We also have a Facebook page, which a very kind volunteer of mine runs. She's wonderful. Her name is Erica. Hi, Erica. Hope you're listening. Fabulous. And while I'm here, I also want to thank Jen, who does a lot of the audio editing for Nightlight. She's been amazing too. She runs the Skiffy and Fanty podcast, so you guys should definitely check that out. And if you are still listening, then I'm going to give you a coupon code to get free shipping on anything from my website, and it's going to be fandom.
Awesome. Super cool. I think you might be the first person to ever do that. So
Totally on the
yay.
fly, your idea, because you were talking about if you're still listening. I'm like, we got to give something to the people that are still listening. So yeah, fandom.
And what's the website? Nightlight Pod?
Yes,
or
nightlightpod.com.
Awesome. And I'll make sure that the show notes have the link and everything for Twitter and Facebook and links to subscribe to the podcast. And yeah,
Awesome.
I just want to say, Tonia, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast, talking about all these really cool things and, basically showing our ages as we're talking about them. It's always fun a lot of the people that I record with skew a little bit about 10 years younger than me. So it's nice to have someone right around like the same age.
Yeah. You got an old person on here. It's great. Us elderly folks.
Back in our day.
Taking over. But no, it's been a blast. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to Tales from the Fandom. Subscribe to us on iTunes or your podcast app of choice. Follow us on Facebook at www.facebook.com/Tales from the Fandom to see photos, links, leave feedback, and check out upcoming guests. If you'd like to be a guest, email David at talesfromthefandom@gmail.com.